to get this show on the road or what? Look at this disorganization. You going in the wrong seat?
Yep. Time waits for no one. Welcome, everyone, to the Braintree Town Council meeting for Tuesday, December 3rd, 2024. Can you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can you please remain standing for a moment of silence for our men and women in uniform? Thank you. Please be seated. Could we please have the roll call?
Councilor Barrica? Here. Councilor Flaherty?
Here.
Councilor Hume?
Here.
Councilor Maglio?
Here.
Councilor Moran?
Here.
Councilor Quilty? Here. Councilor Reynolds? Here. Councilor Ringus is not attending this evening. Councilor Ryan?
Here.
Thank you.
Are there any announcements from any of the councilors? Councilor Reynolds, good evening.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to announce that there is the Executive Office of Veteran Services will be holding a town hall on the HERO Act, and that'll be a virtual meeting that is scheduled for December 19th at 6 p.m. And further information will be provided on the town website for that if there are any interested folks in the town of Braintree, anyone that you may know who is a veteran. And there'll be another opportunity to understand the new benefits and services that are provided by the state of Massachusetts for our veterans. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Reynolds, for always keeping us updated on things important to veterans.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Councilor Hume.
Thank you, Mr. President. This Thursday, December 5th, is the annual Braintree Christmas Party that will benefit the children of Braintree. It's being held at the Sons of Italy, 161 King Hill Road. There are appetizers and a cash bar. It starts at 6:30 p.m. They are asking your admission is an unwrapped toy. They're also in need of coats, gloves, scarves, and hats, and socks sizes adult small to extra large. They also need sweatshirts, hoodies, sweatpants, sizes adult small to extra large, because they do provide gifts to teenagers and young adults. And they're also looking for makeup, face mask, perfume, cologne, and basic toiletries. And they always do a pajama drive too. So again, this Thursday, December 5th, 6:30, Braintree Sons of Italy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hume. Are there any other announcements from any councilors? Okay, thank you. We also have an announcement. We have Chief Viola here from the Braintree Firefighters. I want to invite the chief up. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for allowing me some time here tonight. I just wanted to, I've been very busy, both administratively and in response at the fire department. And before I begin the reason I'm here, I wanted to just acknowledge the working crews over the last month or so with the brush fires in East Braintree. The firefighters were amazing during those times. They were a pain in the neck. They were in very remote areas. There was one in the Highlands, one in East Braintree. Access was very difficult. There was a lot of hose to be lugged. There was a lot of rough terrain to climb over. And not only your Braintree firefighters, but the other firefighters who helped and came in with mutual aid agreements and everything else. And it was a pretty amazing event. Something I've never seen in 30 years, a fire of that size and, you know, that close to homes and things like that. We have brush fires all the time, but not like that. And with the dry conditions, it only exacerbated it. So just a quick thank you to not only our firefighters, but all the other firefighters who helped us. So, also to the East Braintree residents, they put up with us for 12 to 14 days, overnight, lights flashing, engines roaring, people talking in their backyards, letting us in their backyards, and in some cases we got some free pizza, so that was cool. But we appreciate that very much, and I just had to squeeze that in before I'm here for what I'm here for. So this is another amazing event that happened on October 29th on Jefferson Street. The crew that's working, in fact, they're working right now across the street in the Highlands, East Braintree, responded to a building fire. And I'll just read the letter that I wrote to the mayor. Mayor Joyce, on the evening of October 29th, 2024, members of the Braintree Fire Department were dispatched to a reported structure fire with residents trapped inside at number 190 Jefferson Street. Immediately, the crew were met by frantic bystanders stating that there was someone inside the building. It was quickly confirmed by Braintree police officers on scene that there was, in fact, a resident inside, second floor, unable to escape. Upon arrival, members of Engine Company 1, Captain Anthony Venuti, firefighter Vincent Joyce, firefighter Brendan Curry, and firefighter Jeremy Hearn quickly deployed a ground ladder to a side window on the second floor where the resident was trapped inside. Firefighter Jeremy Hearn climbed the ladder to the second floor, extracted the resident from the window, climbing down and handed her off to the rest of the crew. These quick actions by these members of the Braintree Fire Department, in my opinion, saved this resident's life that night. These members exemplify what it means to be a firefighter daily, and I know this, but these actions on that night were valiant in effort. Braintree firefighters provide excellent, proficient, professional emergency services every day. It's with great pride and honor that I award the entire crew of Engine 1 a unit citation for success in this life-saving action. Additionally, I'm going to award Jeremy Hearn with a life-saving award. I just think that this rare occasion where they can come into this chaotic scene the way they did, ignore the noise, so to speak, deploy the ladder, rescue a resident, get them down and get them off to the hospital to be treated, and then go back and just start fighting the fire. I know that the mayor came to the scene and she toured it. I explained to her all the factors of why we do certain things, cutting holes and doing all that. And it was just an amazing night. It's a good outcome. That's what we want every time. And I felt it very necessary that you folks and the residents of the town understand who they have riding down the street in those big red trucks. And I just appreciate your time tonight and allowing me to be here to speak. And I appreciate all the efforts of the men and women of the Braintree Fire Department. And thank you so much for your support. I have time for questions if you'd like. If not, I will let you get to business.
Well, I'd like to just say on behalf of the council, thank you to the Braintree Fire Department. We're so lucky that we live in Braintree where we have such qualified public safety people. The fire department does a great job, and we're very lucky. So thank you so much, and please let the firefighters know we're very grateful. Thank you.
I will, and I concur. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, the next item on the agenda is old business 23080, Mayor CPC appropriation, request for appropriation, fire station, historic restoration, or take up any action related thereto. We're going to continue the public hearing to January 21st, 2025 at 7:30 p.m. Is there a motion to open the public hearing for order 23080?
So moved. Second?
We have a motion, and we have a motion to open the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and now we need a motion to continue the public hearing.
Motion to continue the public hearing for Order 23080 to January 21st, 2025 at 7:30 PM.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is 24055, Mayor Transportation Infrastructure Enhancement Trust Fund, or take up any action related thereto. This requires a public hearing. Do we have a motion to open public hearing for Order 24055?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to open the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous. I'm going to refer to Councilor Berica, Chairwoman of the Committee on Ways and Means, for a recommendation on Order 24055.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The committee met on November 20th. We voted unanimously for a favorable recommendation to the full council on this order.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the mayor's staff that would like to speak on Order 24055? Mr. Thompson.
Good evening, Council President Ryan and members of the council. John Thompson, the Acting Director of Public Works. Just wanted to give a quick summary of the Transportation Infrastructure Enhancement Trust Fund. It's a statewide fund that's generated by small fees on rideshare companies based on their total number of trips statewide, and then a portion of that is then distributed to cities and towns based on a pro rata share of the total rides. In 2023, rideshares did approximately 78 million rides total in the state of Massachusetts, and about 498,000 of those rides originated in the town of Braintree. So as such, the Braintree's allocation of the fund is $49,795.10. The DPW historically uses this funding to complete traffic-related projects around the town, including traffic calming initiatives, traffic signal maintenance and upgrades, and then smaller projects such as signage and guardrail installation. So that's a real quick summary, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from the council? Okay, is there a motion to close? Is there anyone from the general public that would like to speak on Order 24055? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public hearing for Order 24055?
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous. Is there a motion for Order 24055?
Yes, Mr. President. Motion that the sum of $49,795.10 received from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Transportation Infrastructure Enhancement Trust Fund be appropriated to the Department of Public Works to be spent in accordance with ST 2016, Chapter 187, Section 8 CI.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay. The next item on the agenda is 24061, Mayor Tax Rate Classification, or take up any action related thereto. This requires a public hearing. Is there a motion to open the public hearing for Order 24061?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to open the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous. I'm going to refer to Council Berica, Chairwoman of the Committee on Ways and Means, for a recommendation on Order 24061.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, the committee met on November 20th, and we voted unanimously for a favorable recommendation to the full council on Order 24061.
Thank you. I just want to note in attendance this evening is Mike Esmond, the Finance Director, Paul Sullivan, the Deputy Assessor, and the Board of Assessors Chairman Bob Cusack, Susan O'Brien, and Robert Conley. So, Mike, would you like to speak from the Mayor's office on this?
Thank you, Mr. President. Would you allow me maybe 30 seconds just to get set up?
Sure.
Before I pull this down. Is that okay? Perfect. All right.
It's like me trying to plug my phone in at night and it doesn't reach. I had to go get a long cord.
Believe it or not, we practiced for this probably about 2 hours before, and this wasn't how it was supposed to go, but we can make do, right? The good thing is that our folks gave us a couple different options when all else fails. So I have a presentation in front of you. Sorry. We'll make this work, I swear. And I'm going to try to move through the materials relatively expeditiously because I know folks have the deck in front of them. Start from the top. But thank you, Mr. President and members of the council. I'll be presenting information today on the fiscal 25 tax rate and tax classification for the tax classification hearing. But I want to also note, as we work through the materials, one thing that Paul Sullivan and myself have worked this year to do is to make available on the mayor's fiscal 25 budget page a tax classification booklet. And our intention, I have a copy of it here, and I think the members were provided one as well. But the intention here is to continue to provide additional information to our residents, available online in other formats, to do as best as we can to take sometimes complicated information and make it as digestible as possible and make it as abbreviated as possible for folks who don't have all the time in the world to digest this. So that is a big goal of ours, and we'll continue to work through the process in the ensuing months and weeks and months to get information out to our residents. And I know I can speak for the mayor and say we would welcome any questions, suggestions, et cetera, from the council on ways that we can continue to do that. Just really quickly, for the purposes of tonight, what we're doing is, as folks know, is this hearing is really for us to meet our statutory requirement for us to set essentially the residential shift factor that we will be using to ultimately determine the tax rates allocated to the various different classifications in the town. And this is something that is done annually, required every year. You'll hear me talking about the residential shift through this discussion. This is a requirement, as I said, under municipal finance law, and it's a critical component of the schedule, and for us to make sure that we're on pace to be able to issue, gain approval from the Department of Revenue, to get approved tax rates and then issue third and fourth quarter bills reflecting those approved tax rates. Represented here is just a schedule. There's really what we're talking about is right now we're in a part of months-long schedule for us to set these rates. And this process, while it's not always intensive day in, day out, it is a many months-long process. It begins all the way back annually with the setting of the budget, which sets the town-wide levy amount that will be essentially raised in any given fiscal year, in this case for fiscal 25. And you can see over the ensuing months the different tasks and milestones that need to be met in order for us to be able to, in December, hold the tax classification hearing. There's many other sub-steps that are not identified here, and by completing tonight's hearing, we are not completely done. We still need the Department of Revenue to approve ultimately our tax recap information, our budgetary information essentially that goes into us setting the tax rate, as I noted. But the classification hearing is essential, and it will set, this will be what we do to essentially set the tax residential shift for determining that. In January 2025, culminating after all this work, getting approval from the Department of Revenue, our Q3 and Q4 tax bills are then issued to residents reflecting the changes. Just by way quickly of a reminder, as I said earlier, in May, we adopted the 2025 budget that assumed the amount of the levy to be raised as folks obviously are aware, on June 15th, with the residents' approval of the $8 million override, that amount was raised by that corresponding amount. So you can see here the budgeted assumption for that tax levy limit for fiscal 23 was just over $123 million in fiscal 25. Turning quickly to the valuations, and these are critical, this data is critical for the determination ultimately of the tax rate, and also informs the decision for the residential tax shift. You can see here for the fiscal 25 values that are listed, and on the presentation, I know it's small print, but you have this in your deck. The total taxable valuation for the town of Braintree this year is about $10.2 billion. Which represents about a 5.2% increase from fiscal 24. Here we've projected, or we've broken out the percentage change by the major tax classifications. So that's residential versus commercial, industrial, and personal property, or CIP. The residential growth in valuation this year was about 5.4%. You can see that that change corresponds to about $420 million in valuation growth. And correspondingly, for the same number for the CIP was about 4.6, which in fiscal 25, represents about $526 million in valuation change. So basically, in aggregate, that's what they come out to 5.2% annual growth. Just by way of giving a bit of comparison to how this would have looked a year ago, valuation growth in residential was just under 9% year over year, and on the CIP side, I think it was just about under 2%. So this is a little more balanced in fiscal 25 than we had in the previous year. You can see that the residential classification still makes up a substantial portion. And that corresponds roughly to about 81%, just under 81% of our total taxable valuation. Sorry. So turning to the residential factor shift, you can see here, that 81% is represented right there. The other main pieces round out taxable valuation, commercial being the second biggest at 14%. What we're talking about, as members of the council are aware, is implementing potentially a residential shift factor up to 1.75 or 175%, which allows us to essentially shift the allocated percentage of the levy from residential onto the CIP, commercial, industrial, and personal property ratepayer. This is something that the town has employed for close to 20 years, using the factor of 175% or 1.75. And what's illustrated here on the far right column is after implementing that shift, you can see what the different allocation percentages would be. So residential is decreased by 18% from the 81% down to 66.6, which is very close to what it would have been last year. It was 66.4 roughly. So it's 0.2% change, increase from the previous year, even with the full shift, which is really driven by the valuation increases that we see from fiscal 24 into 25. You can see the sort of the contrasting shift changes as we implement the 175 on the CIP classification. So commercial, industrial, and personal property would be at 24.84, 5.8, and 2.7 after implementation of the shift. All similar corresponding to the 24 tax rates after, or tax percentages after the residential shift. But you can see the change after, from what they would otherwise be if you use the pro forma just at percent of value. So this is helpful, I think, in just illustrating quickly, briefly, what ultimately what the shift will do as far as moving the percentage taxation from the residential classification to the others. What's illustrated here, and I know it's small print, but is really to give a sense of what the year-over-year change would be. And at the bottom, we did provide an example of what the residential tax burden would be if you did not implement the shift. I think this is one of the most standard questions we get asked annually as part of these hearings. So we did provide for each case, residential, commercial, industrial, and so on, what the 1.75% looks like compared to the prior year. So assuming we implemented the 1.75 shift in each year, but then in the last row where it says at 1% or 1.00, sorry, factor, you can see should we not adopt the 175, there'd be a pretty considerable change to the average residential tax rate and annual bill that would be from the prior year. The hope here is to illustrate, kind of the impact of that should we not adopt the 175 for fiscal 25. So moving to estimating the fiscal 25 tax rates themselves, just probably important to note the actual 25 levy will be adjusted for the new growth that we have now had approved by DOR. That's coming in at 1.57 million. The budget assumed just under 600,000, which was the actual from the prior year. So we've seen a pretty substantial pickup, about 462 above what our budgeted estimate was. This is if you look at sort of recent history, that's a reversal of some of the trends we've seen more recently. A lot of that gain was in the personal property side, where we have been able to recognize over 500,000 in new growth in fiscal 25 to add to as part of the 1.057. But but we did see new growth across all major classifications, and again, as we note here, it was the first time we've seen since fiscal 20 where we've seen new growth actually exceed the prior year. So hopefully an encouraging trend. We did for the first time break out the contracted services that we rely on to do some of our assessments, to include a personal property as well as a real property valuation team. So we had essentially two different teams this year. That was helpful in us being able to really focus and target those specifically as part of a requirement every year and setting fair market value amounts, and also helped to identify and document the new growth, particularly on the personal property side. So these numbers that are provided here, I should emphasize, for the tax rate are estimates. Ultimately, they are not set until we actually have the Department of Revenue approve our tax recap information and our estimate of the tax rate. But for illustration, for the council, we did provide an estimate of what the tax rate would be. First, showing the tax rate with just the residential factor shift. So that's us implementing at 1.75 illustrated here. You'll see the residential again at the 81% value, but after the shift about 66.6%. And with the updated allocation of the tax levy to be raised, that brings the tax rate at about $9.98, which compares to $9.48 in fiscal 24. For a single-family residence, which is typically one of the classification subgroups that we focus the most on, that brings the average single-family tax bill in about $7,032. Again, these are estimates, and they will be subject to the final approval of the Department of Revenue, although I would expect that we wouldn't see much material change from what's represented here.
Does that include the override?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Another part of the consideration in the motions that are filed with Town Council are the adoption, which is recommended by the mayor and by the Board of Assessors, is to continue to adopt the small business commercial exemption. Essentially, in practice, what this does is it will increase marginally the rate that the commercial rate payer generally is subject to by exempting for eligible small businesses in Braintree. The first 10% of their valuation is not taxed. So there's roughly about 100 businesses that took advantage of this last year, exempting about $50 million in taxable value. Right now, I think Paul is 88 or so, or I think we estimate are eligible right now. Of course, it's entirely be subject to those same small businesses coming in and applying for that. So it could increase or decrease, but at the moment, that is the sort of baseline that we would be working on, those two figures for 24 and 28.5. With that, by adopting the commercial exemption that we're showing here, it again would raise the rate modestly across the entire commercial industrial ratepayer, but allow for those eligible small businesses to that qualify to benefit from that tax exemption for the first 10% of their valuation. Finally, just a couple quick slides to bring back on the single-family home tax impact that's presented here. So you can see the year-over-year change, 2024 to 2025, in these estimated figures. So the year-over-year change, including the override, the impact will be about $697 for the average single family, which is about 11% year-over-year change. And if you see here, if you look closely here, particularly on the bottom rows, essentially you can see the breakout of how much of that is attributable to what we would call annual Prop 2.5, limits as far as what the increases could be, as well as what's attributable to the override. So the 697 is broken out into those pieces, and as I've noted here, roughly 35% of that annual change is attributed to annual 2.5%, annual Prop 2.5 increases, and the balance 65% would be attributed to the override. Finally, just an important note in preparing for the Q3 and Q4 tax bills. It's always important to note that those bills reflect the rates that would be approved by the Department of Revenue following the classification hearing. The preliminary rates, so that's for the first and second quarter, are essentially only reflect 2.5% growth from the annualized tax bill from the prior fiscal year. So it's very common for a resident, a homeowner, a business owner, when they get their bill to see if they're looking at the Q1, Q2 versus Q3, Q4 to see a big substantial increase. And it's something that it's important to note. There's reasons why that is. Once the tax rate is adopted, essentially there's a catch-up that's done as we actualize to what the actual bills will be as we fully reflect in the Q3 and Q4. These numbers are illustrative of what our residents may see. We won't know for sure until the actual rates are approved, as I've noted, and we issue the final bills later this month. But this is something that we will make sure that we continue to try to put out as much information for residents, for members to be aware of as folks are getting those actual Q3 and Q4 bills later, really in early January. And so that wraps up my slides, and I'd be happy to take any questions. And I thank Paul and the Board of Assessors for their support. This is my first year here, first classification hearing, so they've been a great assistance to myself, and I thank them for that.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from the council? Council Hume.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Edmonds, great presentation, I think, for us, but also the residents. It is visually pleasing, and taxes are not visually pleasing, and they're boring to a lot of people. So this really simplifies it easily understandable. Is this going out on the website, did you say, for residents?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the tax classification booklet I held up is already on, so residents could visit the mayor's fiscal 25 website, and this will be there. We'll also be putting it on the assessor's page as well.
Okay.
And also making sure that we're updating it as we get additional information. You know, similar to the budget, where we want to continue to make sure that we're being responsive. FAQ documents are, you know, sort of living documents, and being able to address questions as we get them and as we can address them.
Okay. And I had a question on the personal property piece. But did you say this is the first time it's been broken out, the personal property piece?
What's been broken out, I don't know if it's the first time, but we, in recent history, we've used essentially one contractor to help support the assessor's office annually in determining the valuation of all the parcels, all the properties, commercial and residential and townwide. In fiscal 24, halfway through fiscal 24, as that contract was set to expire, 2 procurements were held where we were essentially seeking a contractor in charge of just real property, and now one for the personal property, whereas the previous incumbent would have done both. It allowed us to make sure that we're selecting someone in each of those cases that was most advantageous for those specific categories. So we did, during the budget, it was something we noted that we were investing more. It was, you know, I think we increased the budget from 100,000 roughly to about 190,000 for these 2. But we were expecting and hopeful that we would see a result where we were getting more personal property recognized and updated as far as the valuations go.
So it was, in the documents, there was a 15% increase in personal property, which was unusual, is what was, I believe I read correctly.
Correct.
So that is not because of the new way of doing it?
Well, that
It
is,
is actually,
I think we would say that it's helped that we have a targeted firm specifically that was selected just for that. It allows us to basically ensure that, you know, someone who we feel is the most advantageous in looking at the valuation of personal property was selected for that. Whereas, so it has helped. That certainly has helped in being able to recognize new growth there and update the valuations that we have for those personal property. And that's large. That's property owned by commercial industrial.
was that just
ratepayers.
one commercial owner, so to speak, that represented that 15% increase?
No,
or-
that would be
okay,
across
okay.
all of the commercial industrial rate payers in the town.
Okay. Will we continue to expect an increase in that, or hard to say?
I wouldn't think we would continue to see increases like that. I think a lot of it has to do with new growth that's being recognized this year. But it is helpful, I think, in that we've been able to get an update there, validate the use of using 2 different contractors for that, and you know, let them sort of be specialized in that way. You know.
Okay, great. And thank you to the Board of Assessors for all your work. Appreciate it. We get to see you once a year, and so all your work culminates to this night. So thank you very much. Thank you. All set.
Thank you. Any other counselors? Council Baraka?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And I also want to say thank you to all of the work that's gone into this. And I wanted to build on Councilor Hume's note about the personal property. So thank you for bringing that up, Councilor. My understanding is, or maybe you can confirm my understanding, Director Esmond, that we saw this year, I'm looking at the new growth, over $1 million. So I think that was close to twice what was budgeted, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe not quite two times.
Not quite twice, but meaningfully more, yeah. I mean, essentially 450 roughly on top of 600, so.
Okay, so that is really important. And was it driven by the personal property that we were that uncovered? Or
That's the largest part, certainly, yeah.
That, I think that, so I can commend the mayor for taking that action, and I know we had a lot of questions when we were authorizing that additional spend for that, and it's really great to see that coming to fruition. So thank you. I know our assessor was very bullish on that, and I appreciate it, and it's fantastic. We haven't seen $1 million in new growth in quite some time. So really, really important for the residents to understand new growth is one of the main components that helps keep our budget going. And so that's great to see as we're getting projects in the pipeline that in the interim, this is really, really important. And the other thing I just wanted to clarify for residents is what the council's voting on tonight is whether or not to provide this, what we're calling the tax shift. We don't set the rate per se. We're just voting on the shift. And what that essentially does is provides tax relief to our residents by placing a larger tax burden on our large-scale businesses. So we're not talking about the small shops owned in our squares and in the landing, but on our large-scale businesses. And as a result of that shift, if this goes through this evening, that's going to save residents an average of about $1,400 a year on their tax bill. And I think it's really a great deal. Also for the large businesses that are carrying a heavier burden in Braintree, they've got municipal utilities, which are typically at a much lower rate, our unbelievable, unmatched location, and our highly educated workforce. So I just want to help clarify what this vote is this evening. The main vote will be to vote for this shift to make sure residents have the most advantageous tax rate that we can possibly provide for them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other councilors? Councilor Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mike, for a great presentation this evening, and thank you also to the Board of Assessors and Mr. Sullivan for all the work you've done this year. It's been a very difficult year. And I guess my comments I'd like to start off is kind of setting a baseline of why we're seeing the increase. And this is my take on things, is that, it's very telling is your FY25 new growth graph. And its comparison to previous years in terms of new growth year over year. And as you pointed out here, that the 1.05 million in fiscal 25 represents the first time since fiscal year 20 that a new growth didn't decline from our previous year. That's a really important note for people to understand. It's a very basic principle of why we had to go to the well, if you will, for an override, debt exclusion. Also why we had to go to the well for a 2.5 override, because we're not bringing in the amount of new growth year over year to keep pace with the cost that the town incurs year over year. We've never seen our cost really go down, and I think it would be an outlier if we did, or that it has in the past. So the next point is I just want to cover is that in 2020, we saw a growth, an increase of new growth from, I'm going to say, roughly, well, we saw an increase, and that really had to do mostly, I think, and I'd ask you to weigh in on this, with the COVID state and federal relief funds. Really made up a good piece of our revenue, if you will. Could you take a moment to comment on that, or do you see it as such, or isn't that simple?
Well, I think if we're talking about the entire town operating budget, so we're talking about not tax levy, but but actually just the rest of the operating budget. I think yes, the federal revenue that was available to the town, either as revenue or in relief as that would help defray costs, essentially to allow us to charge off to other funding sources. Both of those essentially allowed budgetary relief for the town's operating budget.
Great. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make that a clear point for the people at home. Fiscal 20, that represents really the end of June of 2020, that represents the cutoff of all that new growth that we had received in that fiscal year. This then triggers my next question, is that we know that we had the increases, pardon me, that was me hitting the microphone. We saw the increases in our tax levy because of the overrides, and it was because of a need for us to address a number of years of negative growth, one could say, or slow growth, others would say. So, and as a result, there was a lot of effort and communications put out when the 2.5 override was being proposed, and the way that the town had represented what those changes would mean to our taxpayers, both residential and otherwise. So now tonight, we're really seeing for the first time what those real numbers actually are as a result of that effort. And it's not fun. It's not my choice, or I should say I wouldn't want to continue to pay such an increase in our taxes, but necessarily in this one particular year, we do have to bite the bullet a little bit. It's gonna require a bit more of us as a town this coming fiscal year in our tax payments. The other evening at the Ways and Means Committee, you did take some time to describe to the committee members that the actual impact of the 2.5 override that was passed this last year in 2024, that we will actually see the results of that hitting our tax bills in 2025.
Correct.
Could you just a little bit kind of give us a simple description of that for the folks
Sure.
at home?
So essentially, what we mean by that is that in calendar 25, beginning in calendar 25, which is what we call Q3, and the first 6 months of that represent our Q3 and Q4 fiscal year 25 bills. Those bills essentially represent now the final actual tax bills for fiscal 25 after the rate has been set. Prior to that, homeowners and businesses were issued preliminary tax bills for their first 2 quarters. Those represent essentially their prior year tax bill grown by 2.5%, and then essentially divided by 4. So they essentially receive 2 quarters worth of those. And this, I should say, is prescribed under state law, this process of setting preliminary bills and issuing them. It's really so that the towns, cities and towns can make sure that we have normal business. We're issuing some tax bills to residents in a timely way and not waiting for various levels of approval or data to be determined, set, et cetera, in the ensuing months of the fiscal year. But the reality is, as those are preliminary, they will essentially typically not be equal to whatever the final amount is, and there's often a catch-up. And what I
those
mean
are
by that-
reflected again in Q3 and 4.
Yeah, and that's in a normal year. In the case of a year where an override was adopted by town's residents, such as 25 for Braintree, they do not reflect the adopted levy accounting for the override. That will now be in the Q3 and 4, so in the last 6 months of this fiscal year, beginning in 2025, calendar 2025. So that is a change that we discussed at Ways and Means. And in any year, it's not uncommon for a resident to look at their bill or a company to look at their bill and see those see month-to-month changes within a fiscal year and or quarter-to-quarter, and ask about it. And so correspondingly, I would think we will continue to get questions, but obviously this change will now reflect the full levy adjustment, the full impact of the override. So that will be a notable change, and one that we'll want to continue to put information out to explain why that is the case between the preliminary Q1, Q2, and the final Q3 and Q4, why residents see those differences.
Great, thank you so much for that explanation. Again, it's for the benefit of the folks who will be listening in, watching this evening. And so we see a 50-cent increase in per thousand tax rate from $9.48 to $9.98 as we go into Q3 and 4 of fiscal year 25. We don't generally see that high a number. And again, that is reflective upon just the explanation you gave us.
Right.
So it would be anticipated that we wouldn't see that large an increase as we go in to set our rates for 26.
Correct. I think one of the questions we got during the override discussions was, what does that essentially mean? An override, when adopted by a community, really is an annual, essentially is an annual impact. In that singular year, you are permanently increasing the levy limit, but you are not in any subsequent fiscal year following now no longer subject to. In fact, you revert back to being subject to just the 2.5% increase. And this is a challenge that all cities and towns face. It's that, that when I say challenge, the growth of the tax levy is bound by the requirements of Prop 2.5, and that is the 2.5% growth townwide. How it is allocated across the different classifications is driven very much by the valuations that are determined every year. Market transactions, other things that are going on. But yeah, we would expect that we will be return back to the 2.5% growth townwide that falls as required under Prop 2.5.
And in terms of the commercial rate, we see that we had a 50-cent increase in actual dollars and cents from fiscal 24 to 25. What is that number for commercial rate?
For the commercial ratepayer, let's see. I'm sorry, let me see. I'm not sure if we had it on the slides, but we have it in the classification. I'm sorry, we do. It's the slide 7.
Slide 7.
Right, so you can see the commercial ratepayer as estimated at $21.29 for the tax rate for 25, which compares to $20.25 for 24.
Okay, thank you.
If you see that, I know it's small print, apologize.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And the reason I bring that up is that I think as previous speakers had spoken to, the need for us to find new growth. And in the commercial rate, I should say, the industrial, commercial, personal property categories, we have a significant opportunity to help us check the larger increases year over year of our taxes, particularly on the residential side of the house, if we're able to promote responsible growth in our commercial and industrial areas, as well as in our multi-unit housing initiatives that are in the pipeline, as the previous speaker also pointed out. And I just want to emphasize that point for the public's knowledge and for their consumption to understand the importance of why we can't just stagnate as a community because of those growths that occur. What do they say? Death and taxes, right? That if we can control those changes that impact us year over year, that benefit us as residential homeowners. And I know that is a very big concern amongst a number of our residents. But this is a validation, Mike. I think what you've presented to us this evening is a validation that really accurately depicts what happens when we ignore that responsibility as a community. And so, again, I want to say thank you. You've made this very digestible to the layman. And that's really important. And it's important to me as a counselor when trying to explain why we have these increases in taxes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there any other councils? Council Moran.
Mike, thanks for your detailed and colorful presentation this evening. I want to point out a couple of things more about the shift. First of all, the majority of municipalities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts have a unified tax rate, have a single rate.
Right.
So Braintree is one of the minority communities in adopting a shift. And we were able to do that over the years, and I believe in the early 2000s we first went to the max 175 and have maintained that subsequently. And as Councilor Barrica noted, the relief to the average taxpayer is approximately $1,400. However, the caveat that I have is back when we first adopted that shift, my recollection is that the commercial tax base made up 35% of the value and then at that time accounted for 50% of the overall tax revenue. Now we're at a point where it's at 19% of our overall levy and providing 34% roughly of the overall tax revenue. So we need to cultivate, and that is, partially it's market. It's market related to the rapid growth in residential values and the incremental to stagnant growth on the commercial values, and that's outside of Braintree. It's national, it's regional because of consumers' habits have changed, and I get that. But nonetheless, we have to cultivate and nurture our in commercial industrial base. We can't take it for granted. We have to provide an attractive business community, an attractive place to do business for businesses that will enhance our community. So we need to continue to work on that. I had an opportunity to talk to you briefly about overlay surplus, which is the money that is set aside, required by law to be set aside in anticipation of abatement applications for residential and commercial. And you've told me that overall overlay surplus has grown to over $1 million at this point, roughly? 1.2?
I think actually, sorry, Counselor, I think the surplus that could be essentially treated as, that could be released essentially, is now over, I want to say over 2 million.
Okay, it's over 2 million, which is, it's heading in the right direction. We have to anticipate that the impact of the override and the debt exclusion being fully felt, along with the revaluation, is probably going to trigger abatement applications in an increased fashion. So we can't treat that as a unlimited resource. But my interest in the growth of that and my continued interest in growth of that is because I see that as a resource for tax relief for seniors. And we have to remember there are, we voted in these increases for the debt exclusion and we voted in the increase for the override. And they had broad support, both of them. That being said, there is still a segment of our populace that is not able to absorb these increases as easily as others. And we need to find ways for relief to seniors particularly that are impacted by these increases. And there are approximately 40 communities statewide that do provide through home statutes, homeroom statutes that provide relief. And one of the ways they provide relief is through the use of overlay surplus and using that as a pool of money to provide relief to eligible residential taxpayers, particularly those that qualify for the relief that comes when you have the circuit breaker relief. So if you qualify for circuit breaker relief, you can qualify for a residential home rule petition relief as well. And I'm interested in exploring that when we have overlay surplus in a position to fund that. So I think those are my questions and comments. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor. One thing, Mr. President, just maybe I didn't note, but just in the materials that we had, and we will continue to do that, is provide exemptions that exist at the moment for residents, whether they're seniors or other qualified groups. And that is, I know, something that the mayor is committed to doing, is continuing to look at ways to provide additional exemptions. For example, the senior work-off program and other programs such as what Councilor Moran is saying. I didn't note it before, so I just wanted to emphasize that.
Any other councilors? I just want to make a couple quick comments. I just want to, I want to thank the Board of Assessors, Council Bob, Chairman Bob Cusack, Susan O'Brien, Robert Conley. I've been doing this a long time, and the Board of Assessors have been doing this a long time as well. And I'd like to thank their steady leadership behind the scenes on this, so thank you very much for that. I want to thank Mike for his presentation. Again, I've been doing this a long time. This is the most information I've ever seen we've been presented tonight, so thank you. I think it's a great idea that we're going to have this on the town's website, and people can see the transparency of related to how we set the tax rate. I've taken this vote, I think, for 20 years when I was a selectman, and I've been a councilor for 17 years now, and I've always voted to shift the tax on the commercial property as much as we can, the full 175%. Living in Braintree, as Council Moran stated, we do rely on the commercial property, and we need to make sure we can keep doing that for the future. But we are very much impacted by the commercial property on the town of Braintree. Try, driving around Braintree at rush hour traffic or the holiday season, driving anywhere near the South Shore Plaza. Our lives are very much impacted by the commercial property in Braintree. So I have no problem taking this vote once again to shift it fully as much as we can. So you're looking for a favorable recommendation for all of these 4 motions tonight, correct?
That's correct.
All right, is there any other comments from the council? Okay, hearing none, is there any comments from the general public? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to close the public hearing for order 24061?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. Can we have the motions, please?
Yes, motion number 1, to apply the tax rate classification shift. Be it ordained that the town of Braintree adopt the recommendation of the mayor and the Board of Assessors to approve the classification tax rate shift of 175% to be applied to the commercial, industrial, and personal property for fiscal year 2025.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. Council
Motion number
Baraka.
2, small business exemption. To approve the small business exemption as recommended by the mayor and the Board of Assessors in a memorandum to the town council dated November 18th, 2024, and as filed with the office of the town clerk for fiscal year 2025.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous.
Motion number 3, the open space discount. To continue to adopt the recommendation of the mayor and the Board of Assessors as outlined in a memorandum to the town council dated November 18th, 2024, and as filed with the office of the town clerk to decline the adoption of the open space discount for fiscal year 2025.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. Council Baraka.
Motion number 4, the residential exemption. To continue to adopt the recommendation of the mayor and the Board of Assessors as outlined in a memorandum to the town council dated November 18th, 2024, and as filed with the office of the town clerk to decline the adoption of the residential exemption for fiscal year 2025.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much, folks. Okay, the next item on the agenda is 24058. Council President appointment of Deborah J. Stott as interim town clerk. Take up any action related thereto. So as everyone knows, our town clerk is out on medical leave until January of 2025. It's important that the town clerk's office continue to work so they get all the work done as necessary. So we refer this item to the Committee on Personnel Issues, and I'd like to refer to Councilor Moran, Chairman of the Committee on Personnel Issues, for a recommendation for Order 24058.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Personnel Issues met and voted in favor of a favorable recommendation to the council on Order 24058. I would like to first explain this motion. The motion was initially to appoint Deborah Starr as interim town clerk. A subsequent review of statute and confirmation with both the town solicitor and with the Secretary of State's office referred us to Chapter 41, Section 19, which governs this situation, and notes that the assistant town clerk shall, in the absence of the town clerk, perform his duties and have the powers and be subject to the requirements and penalties applicable to him. So a vote is not required for the appointment of the interim town clerk. A vote is only required to establish the salary. We voted this evening to recommend to the full council that Ms. Starr move from her current assistant town clerk level of M12E to the level of M21A.
Thank you. So is that a motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. And
I can read the motion that the interim,
Okay.
I would move that the town clerk salary be established at the M21A level effective October 30th, 2024, until the town clerk returns from medical leave.
That's a motion and a second. So that said effective October 30th, and so the clerk of the council wrote that. Is that the day that the town clerk?
That is the date that the town clerk became absent from his duties.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. I'm going to ask if there's any discussion before this vote. Okay, hearing no discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you, folks. All right. The next item on the agenda is 02824, Council President Review of Policies, Vacation Carryover, Compensation Time, and Overtime, and take up any action related thereto. This item was referred to the Committee on Personnel Issues. I'm going to refer to Council Moran, Chairman of the Committee on Personnel Issues, for a recommendation on Order 02824.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I would move to table this order.
Okay, so I'd ask, do we need a motion to table, or can we just, all right, so we have so you're asking for a motion to table. Is there a second for that?
Second.
All right, we're not going to discuss a motion to table. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the town 03024 Town Council President, the Town Council meeting calendar. So everybody received the calendar and what we're going to be looking at for meetings on during 2025. Couple of things to note is whenever there's a school vacation, we try to not have council meetings at that time. And if there's an election, we're not going to have the meeting on the Tuesday of the election. We're going to have it the next day on the Wednesday. And we also kept no council meetings during May when we're having the budget hearing. So does anybody have any comments or questions on the 2025 Town Council meeting schedule? Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion to accept the 2025 Town Council meeting calendar?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. And with that, we're where we need to refer all items to new business to the respective committees. Do we have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. So we're done with our business for this evening. Our next meeting is going to be on Tuesday, December 17th, 8 days before Christmas. So I hope everybody's going to come in a nice, jolly mood for that meeting. I'd like to thank BCAM for televising our meeting tonight, Bill Needham and Jerry Comic. And with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned for the evening. Thank you, everybody.